Glass shattered before the first drop of blood ever hit the marble floor. 5 armed rogue alphas had cornered the city's most ruthless king. They expected a quick, brutal slaughter. They never expected the quiet, trembling waitress with the coffee pot to be the deadliest predator in the room. The ambient lighting at Laura, a wildly exclusive 5-star restaurant situated on the corner of Magnolia Avenue and 45th Street, was designed to be intoxicating. It bathed the elite patrons in a soft, golden hue, hiding their flaws while highlighting their wealth. For Harper Quinn, the dim lighting was simply a convenience. It made it easier to disappear into the background. Harper was an omega. In the brutal hierarchy of the lycanthrope world, that meant she was the bottom of the food chain, submissive, weak, and meant to serve. But Harper carried secrets far heavier than the silver trays she balanced every evening. Fleeing a decimated pack in the Pacific Northwest 3 years ago, she had spent every day since mastering the art of invisibility. She took scent blockers that tasted like battery acid, masking her natural cedar and rain aroma behind the generic, clinical smell of commercial laundry detergent. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, and her posture slightly slouched. To the human world, she was just a 22-year-old hospitality worker trying to make rent. To the supernatural world, she was a ghost. At 8 p.m., the mahogany double doors of Laura swung open, and the atmospheric pressure in the room instantly plummeted. Harper felt it before she saw him. A heavy, suffocating wave of pure, unfiltered dominance rolled over the dining room. Human patrons paused mid-conversation, rubbing their chests, suddenly feeling short of breath without knowing why. The werewolves in the room, a few scattered businessmen and socialites, immediately lowered their heads, baring their necks in an involuntary display of submission. Dominic Sterling had arrived. He was the Alpha King of the Obsidian Syndicate, the man who held the entire eastern seaboard in a terrifying, iron-fisted grip. Dominic was a towering figure, wrapped in a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit. His jawline looked like it had been chiseled from granite, and his eyes, a piercing, unnatural shade of icy blue, scanned the room with predatory calculation. He possessed a dark, dangerous beauty that drew people in just as effectively as his aura warned them away. "Table 7, Mr. Henderson, the frantic human manager, hissed into Harper's ear, giving her a rough shove toward the dining floor. "The VIP, do not make eye contact. Do not speak unless spoken to. Pour the Macallan 25, take his order, and get out of his breathing space." Harper swallowed hard, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She smoothed her black apron over her crisp white shirt and picked up her serving tray. Approaching Dominic's table felt like walking into the center of a magnetic storm. His scent was overwhelming. Crushed pine, wood smoke, and a sharp, metallic tang of ozone that made her inner wolf whimper in both fear and strange, inexplicable reverence. "Good evening, sir," Harper murmured, keeping her gaze firmly fixed on the crisp white tablecloth as she set a crystal tumbler before him. She uncorked the Macallan and poured exactly 2 fingers of the amber liquid. Dominic didn't look at her, his attention focused on the text messages flashing across his phone screen. "Bring me the ribeye. Rare. No sides." His voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and straight up Harper's spine. "Right away, sir." Harper turned to leave, but as she pivoted, a sudden, sharp draft of cold air swept through the restaurant. The heavy oak doors at the entrance had been shoved open again, but this time there was no sophisticated subtlety to the arrival. 5 men strode into the foyer. They didn't wear tailored suits. They wore dark leather jackets, combat boots, and expressions of sheer malice. Harper recognized the scent immediately. Rotting leaves, copper, and feral aggression Rogues. But not just any rogues. These were alphas who had been cast out, men who had gone feral with power and vengeance. Leading the pack was Silas Blackwood, a notorious exiled alpha with a jagged scar running from his left temple down to his collarbone. Behind him were his 4 lieutenants, Gideon, a mountain of a man with dead eyes, Wyatt, lean and twitchy, Brody, grinning like a psychopath, and Knox, who carried a long, leather duffel bag that distinctly smelled of oiled steel and wolfsbane. Harper froze mid-step, her tray clutched tightly to her chest. Her combat instincts, buried deep and starved for 3 years, screamed at her to move, to seek high ground, to assess the exits. Silas didn't wait for a hostess. He and his men bypassed the front desk, their heavy boots thudding ominously against the marble. The human diners began to murmur in confusion and rising panic. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his face pale. "Gentlemen, I must ask you to wait, to be—" Gideon didn't even break stride. He threw a backhand that connected with the manager's jaw, sending the poor man crashing into a dessert cart in a shower of glass and pastries. Screams erupted from the surrounding tables. Dominic Sterling slowly set his crystal tumbler down. He didn't look surprised. If anything, a dark, blood-chilling smirk played at the corner of his lips as he finally looked up, fixing his icy stare on the 5 men advancing on his table. "Silas," Dominic said, his voice carrying easily over the rising panic of the fleeing humans. "I was wondering when you'd crawl out of the sewers." "You took my territory, Sterling," Silas spat, stopping 10 feet from the table. His eyes were already bleeding into a luminescent, feral amber. "You slaughtered my brother. Tonight, your reign ends. Right here. Right now." Harper stood frozen by a marble pillar, completely unnoticed in the chaos. The restaurant staff was fleeing through the kitchen doors. Patrons were scrambling under tables or running for the fire exits. She should run. As an Omega, her biological imperative was to flee from alpha aggression, but her feet remained planted. Her eyes flicked rapidly between the 5 attackers, analyzing their stances, their weight distribution, and the concealed weapons pressing against their jackets. She knew what was about to happen, and she knew that despite all his power, the Alpha King was walking into a fatal trap. 5 against 1? Dominic mocked, standing up slowly. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with terrifying calm, letting it drop to the floor. "You always were a coward, Silas. Even with the odds, you'll die before I break a sweat." "We'll see about that," Silas snarled. Knox unzipped the leather duffel bag and kicked it over. Dozens of weapons spilled onto the floor. But they weren't guns. They were short swords, trench knives, and heavy batons. Even from 10 yards away, Harper could see the dull, deadly gleam of pure silver. Worse, she could smell the sickeningly sweet, toxic aroma rolling off the blades. Liquid wolfsbane, high-grade, concentrated. A single scratch wouldn't just burn a werewolf, it would paralyze their central nervous system and shut down their rapid healing factor. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, acknowledging the threat, but his arrogance remained intact. Before Silas could issue a command, Dominic moved. He blurred into motion, crossing the distance in a fraction of a second. He didn't fully shift. Doing so would tear the restaurant apart and risk human casualties, but his hands elongated into massive clawed paws, and his teeth extended into lethal fangs. He slammed into Brody first. The sheer force of the impact sent the rogue flying backward through a thick pane of frosted glass that separated the dining room from the bar. Brody hit the mahogany counter and didn't get back up. His neck twisted at an unnatural angle. 1 down, 4 to go, but the remaining 4 were ready. Wyatt and Gideon flanked Dominic, slashing wildly with their silver-coated blades. Dominic ducked a decapitating strike from Gideon, pivoting on his heel to drive a devastating punch into the giant's ribcage. The sound of bones shattering echoed like gunshots. Gideon roared in pain, but as Dominic pulled his arm back, Wyatt stepped in and dragged a silver serrated hunting knife across Dominic's left bicep. The Alpha King hissed as the silver burned through his flesh. Searing white smoke plumed from the wound. But it wasn't just silver. The wolfsbane instantly seeped into his bloodstream. Dominic stumbled, his massive frame suddenly heavy. The veins in his neck bulged, turning a sickly shade of black as the poison began its rapid ascent toward his heart. "Now!" Silas roared. Knox pulled a compressed air pistol from his jacket and fired. A small dart lodged directly into Dominic's thigh, pumping a second, massive dose of wolfsbane directly into his muscle tissue. Dominic roared, a sound that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead and ripped the dart out. But the damage was done. His legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, breathing heavily, his icy blue eyes fighting to stay focused. His healing factor was fighting a losing battle against the concentrated toxin. Silas walked forward, leisurely, picking up a heavy, silver broadsword from the pile on the floor. He dragged the tip of the blade across the marble tiles, creating a horrific, shrieking sound that cut through the agonizing groans of the injured. "Look at you," Silas sneered, standing over the kneeling king, the great Dominic Sterling, brought to his knees in a human diner. "I'm going to take your head, and then I'm going to mount it on the gates of the Obsidian Syndicate." From her position behind the pillar, Harper watched the execution unfold. Her breathing was steady. The world around her had slowed to a crawl. The panicked screams of the remaining humans faded into a dull hum. "Run," her mind whispered. "He is an alpha. Let them kill him. It's not your fight." But then she looked at Silas. She saw the madness in his eyes. If Silas killed Dominic here, he wouldn't leave any witnesses. He would slaughter every human cowering under the tables to ensure no one reported the assassination to the Supernatural Council. He would slaughter her, too. Harper closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, bypassing the scent blockers, reaching down into the darkest, most carefully locked vault within her soul. For 3 years, she had pretended to be a weak, submissive Omega. But before she was a runaway, before she was a waitress, Harper Quinn was the prime enforcer of the Blood Moon Pack. She was a nullifier, a rare breed of lycanthrope, trained by ancient monks to understand the precise anatomical pressure points, nerve clusters, and chakra blockages of a werewolf's body. She didn't need raw strength to kill, she just needed precision. Harper opened her eyes. They were no longer a dull, human brown. They burned with a brilliant, molten gold. Silas raised the heavy silver broadsword high above his head, preparing to bring it down on Dominic's exposed neck. Harper moved. She didn't blur with supernatural speed like Dominic had. She moved with terrifying, fluid efficiency. She closed the distance in 3 silent, gliding steps. Wyatt was the first to notice her. "Hey, what the—" He reached out to grab the tiny waitress. Harper didn't even look at him. As his hand shot toward her collar, she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and jammed her thumb violently into the cluster of nerves just below his radius bone. She twisted sharply. Wyatt's eyes rolled back in his head. The nerve strike essentially short-circuited his brain's connection to his spinal cord. Without a single sound, the rogue alpha collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, completely paralyzed. The soft thud of Wyatt's body hitting the floor made Silas pause mid-swing. He turned his head, a furious snarl twisting his scarred face. "What the hell are you doing, little girl?" he roared. Dominic, fighting through the haze of the wolfsbane, forced his heavy eyelids open. His blurred vision caught the sight of the small waitress in the black apron standing between him and the executioner's blade. He wanted to shout at her to run, to save herself, but his vocal cords were paralyzed by the poison. Nox, furious at seeing Wyatt drop, lunged at Harper with a silver trench knife. He thrust the blade directly at her chest. Harper's face was devoid of emotion. As the blade neared her heart, she pivoted gracefully on her left foot, letting the knife sail inches past her shoulder. With lightning speed, she drove the heel of her palm upward, striking Nox directly under the chin. It wasn't just a physical blow. She channeled a burst of kinetic force right into the vagus nerve. Nox's jaw snapped shut with a sickening crack. The impact disrupted his equilibrium and blood flow simultaneously. He dropped the knife, stumbled backward into a table, and crashed to the floor, unconscious before he even landed. 3 alphas down. Silas stared at the small Omega, his jaw slightly slack with disbelief. 2 of his best fighters had just been neutralized in under 5 seconds by a human-scented waitress who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Who the hell are you?" Silas growled, gripping the silver broadsword with both hands, his feral amber eyes locked onto her. Harper casually kicked Nox's fallen silver knife away from the fighting perimeter. She cracked her neck, a sharp, popping sound echoing in the sudden, eerie silence of the restaurant. "I'm the waitress," Harper said, her voice completely calm, devoid of the trembling fear she had feigned for years. "And I'm afraid your party is being asked to leave." Silas's laugh was a harsh, grating sound that scraped against the elegant acoustics of the ruined dining room. It was a laugh born of absolute disbelief and rising, uncontrollable fury. He looked at the bodies of Wyatt and Nox, both incapacitated by a woman who barely reached his collarbone, and then he looked back at Harper. "A waitress," Silas repeated, the feral amber of his eyes bleeding into a deep, murderous crimson. "You think because you got lucky with 2 of my men, you can stand against an alpha? I am Silas Blackwood. I have slaughtered entire packs. I have painted the snow with the blood of enforcers." Harper didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still amidst the chaos of overturned tables, shattered crystal, and spilled Macallan. The scent of fear, which had been thick in the air just moments before, was entirely gone from her. Instead, the air around her seemed to cool, settling into a heavy, terrifying calm. Even real-life billionaires who frequented the establishment, like the legendary Warren Buffett or the notoriously private members of the Vanderbilt family, had never witnessed a security breach within these heavily guarded mahogany walls. Laura was supposed to be a sanctuary. Now it was a gladiatorial arena, and the reigning champion was bleeding out on the floor. Dominic Sterling, his vision swimming as the high-grade liquid wolfsbane waged war on his cellular structure, forced himself onto his hands and knees. Every muscle fiber screamed in agonizing protest. His veins felt like they were pumping battery acid. Yet, through the haze of lethal toxicity, his icy blue eyes locked onto Harper. He could smell her now. The cheap, generic laundry detergent she used to mask her scent had worn off in the heat of her physical exertion. Beneath it was a scent that hit his highly attuned senses like a lightning bolt. Rain-soaked cedar, crushed midnight blooms, and something older, something deeply primal. It was the scent of a true apex predator hiding in plain sight. "I don't care who you have killed," Harper said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its soft, submissive lilt. "Your arrogance is a vulnerability. Your anger makes you slow." With a deafening roar, Silas charged. He didn't bother with martial arts or tactical strikes. He relied on the sheer, overwhelming, brute force of an exiled alpha. He raised the heavy silver broadsword high above his head, intending to cleave Harper perfectly in 2. The blade whistled through the air, carrying enough kinetic energy to shatter a concrete block. Harper waited until the very last microsecond. As the lethal edge of the silver sword descended, she didn't block it. To block an alpha's strike would snap her forearms like dry twigs. Instead, she executed a flawless, blindingly fast pivot. She slid to the left, her body contorting with liquid grace. The broadsword slammed into the marble floor where she had been standing a fraction of a second before, sending sharp shards of stone exploding outward like shrapnel. Before Silas could wrench the heavy weapon free from the shattered tile, Harper counterattacked. She stepped inside his guard, violating the personal space of a rabid alpha. Her left hand shot out, not as a closed fist, but with her fingers rigid and tightly clustered. She struck Silas directly in the brachial plexus, the complex network of nerves located near the armpit and collarbone. The impact was sharp and precise. Silas let out a choked gasp as his entire right arm instantly went numb, the silver broadsword slipping from his suddenly useless fingers and clattering to the floor. "You bitch!" Silas snarled, swinging a massive, wild left hook at her head. Harper ducked smoothly underneath the sweeping blow, her black apron flaring out around her. As she rose, she drove her elbow upward into the underside of his jaw, snapping his head back, before delivering a devastating, open-palmed strike to the center of his chest. It wasn't designed to break ribs. It was a nullifier technique designed to disrupt the electrical rhythm of the heart. Silas stumbled backward, his breath leaving him in a sudden, violent rush. His heart stuttered, desperately trying to correct the induced arrhythmia. For the first time, a flicker of genuine terror crossed his scarred face. He was an alpha. He was supposed to be invincible against omegas. But this woman wasn't fighting like a wolf. She was fighting like a ghost. "Who taught you that?" Silas gasped, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and realization. "That's the Silent Crescent. That's a dead art." Dominic, still struggling to breathe through the venom in his blood, watched in absolute awe. The Silent Crescent. It was a mythical combat style utilized only by the elite enforcers of the Blood Moon Pack, a pack that had been eradicated from the Pacific Northwest 3 years ago. The style relied on anatomical mastery, manipulating the supernatural biology of a werewolf against itself. "It's not dead," Harper said softly, taking a slow, measured step toward him. "It was just waiting." Desperation clawed at Silas. He realized he couldn't beat her in hand-to-hand combat. His mind fractured under the humiliation. He began to shift. The sickening sound of bones breaking and reforming filled the restaurant. Coarse, dark fur burst from his skin as his jaw elongated into a terrifying, massive snout. He was sacrificing his human mobility for the unstoppable, feral power of a fully shifted rogue wolf. He lunged at her, jaws snapping, intending to tear her throat out. Harper didn't retreat. She dropped to the floor in a sliding crouch, snatching up the silver hunting knife that Wyatt had dropped earlier. As the massive, dark wolf sailed over her, she thrust the blade upward. She didn't aim for a lethal kill shot. She aimed for the exact juncture of the L4 and L5 vertebrae in his lower spine. The silver blade pierced the thick hide and slid perfectly between the bone. Silas let out a high-pitched, agonizing yelp that sounded more like a wounded dog than a fearsome alpha. He crashed into a stack of chairs, sliding across the polished floor in a tangled heap of fur and limbs. He tried to stand, but his hind legs wouldn't obey. The silver, combined with the precise spinal strike, had severed his motor control. The terrifying rogue alpha, who had marched into the restaurant like a conquering king, was now paralyzed from the waist down, dragging his massive upper body across the floor in a pathetic display of defeat. Harper stood up slowly. She wiped a single drop of sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her golden eyes burning with ancient authority. The hard karma was absolute. Silas had sought to assert dominance through terror and brute force. Now he was utterly helpless, brought down by the very class of wolf he deemed worthless. Silence fell over Laura, heavy and absolute, replacing the chaotic symphony of shattered glass and snapping bones. The elegant restaurant now resembled a war zone. Silas Blackwood, the feral exiled alpha who had sought to claim a kingdom, lay paralyzed in a tangle of ruined furniture. His terrifying reign had been extinguished by a single, perfectly executed spinal strike from a woman he hadn't deemed worthy of a second glance. Harper dropped the silver hunting knife. The clatter of the blade against the marble broke the spell. She didn't look at Silas again. The defeated rogue was no longer a threat. Her golden eyes, burning with the ancient authority of the Silent Crescent, locked onto Dominic Sterling. The Alpha King was dying. The liquid wolfsbane had bypassed his legendary healing factor. Sickly black veins crawled aggressively up his muscular neck, spreading across his jawline. His breathing was dangerously shallow, and his piercing, icy blue eyes were clouded with the haze of impending death. Harper dropped to her knees beside him, her black apron soaking up the spilled Macallan. Up close, his sheer size was overwhelming, a mountain of power brought low by a coward's trap. "Don't move," Harper ordered. Her voice had entirely shed the trembling, submissive lilt she had perfected. It was now the commanding, sharp tone of a blood moon enforcer. "Wolfsbane," Dominic rasped, tearing at his paralyzed vocal cords. "Too much." "In the heart." "I know the dosage," Harper said quietly. "This is going to hurt worse than the poison." She ripped his ruined Tom Ford shirt completely open, exposing his heavily scarred chest. She mapped his anatomy, locating the primary pulse points near his collarbone and sternum. Using her thumbs, she pressed down with a brutal, unforgiving kinetic force right into his flesh. Dominic let out a choked, agonizing roar. His powerful back arched off the floor as every nerve ending screamed. Harper was employing a highly dangerous nullifier technique, manually compressing the major arteries to momentarily block the poisoned blood from flooding his heart. "Fight it," Harper commanded, leaning her entire body weight into the strike. "You are the Alpha King. Do not let a rogue's poison take you." For 2 agonizing minutes, it was a battle of sheer willpower. Harper poured her kinetic energy into the strike, holding down a thrashing alpha. Slowly the tide turned. Dominic's legendary biology found leverage. The black veins receded from his neck. His erratic heartbeat stabilized into a slow, thunderous rhythm against her palms. As the lethal danger passed, Harper eased the extreme pressure. Her hands slipped to rest lightly on his broad shoulders. Dominic slumped back, drawing in a massive breath of clean air. He opened his eyes. The cloudy haze had vanished, replaced by a sharp intensity. He looked up at her, and in that split second, the atmospheric pressure in the room shifted completely. It wasn't a wave of terrifying dominance. It was a profound, magnetic pull, a deep, soul-altering tether that snapped violently into place. Harper gasped, stumbling backward. The adrenaline masking her natural scent burned away. The sharp aroma of rain-soaked cedar and ancient forests flared wildly, hitting Dominic's highly attuned senses. "Mate," Dominic breathed. The word rumbled from deep within his chest with absolute certainty. Harper's golden eyes widened in pure shock. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I'm a waitress." "You haven't been a waitress a day in your life," Dominic countered. He slowly pushed himself up, reaching out to wrap his massive hand around her slender wrist. The contact sent a shockwave of electricity up her arm. "You use the Silent Crescent. You smell like the ancient western woods." You are Blood Moon. Harper looked away, her throat tightening. The Blood Moon is dead. Not all of them, Dominic said, his thumb brushing her racing pulse. Who are you? Harper, she whispered, surrendering to the bond. Harper Quinn, daughter of the chief enforcer. Dominic nodded slowly, profound respect washing over his features. You saved my life, Harper Quinn. You neutralized 5 exiled alphas. You have hidden in the shadows, serving men unworthy of your presence. Before Harper could reply, the heavy oak doors burst open. A dozen heavily armed men in dark suits stormed the foyer. It was Dominic's elite guard, led by Harrison, his scarred beta. They expected to find their king assassinated. Instead, they froze in uncomprehending shock. Silas Blackwood was a paralyzed mess on the floor. His deadly lieutenants were broken, and in the center of the carnage sat their alpha king, alive, holding the wrist of a tiny waitress. "Alpha!" Harrison shouted, lowering his weapon. "Where is the strike team?" Dominic didn't look at his beta. He kept his eyes locked entirely on Harper. With a groan of immense effort, the king pushed himself off the floor, rising to his full height. He pulled her up with him. "There was no strike team, Harrison," Dominic stated, his voice ringing with chilling authority. He raised Harper's hand. There was only her. Harrison and the guard stared at Harper in stunned silence, processing the devastation wrought by the Omegan female. "Throw Silas into the holding cells," Dominic ordered coldly. "He will face the council." He looked down at Harper, his expression softening into reverence. He gently untied her black apron, letting the cheap fabric fall. "You are done serving, Harper. From this night forward, you stand at my side. Not as a ghost, not as an Omega, but as my equal." The terrified waitress was a ghost no more. Harper Quinn walked out of the shattered restaurant, not as a servant, but as the Alpha King's fated mate and equal. Silas and his rogues were dragged into the shadows, their rebellion completely crushed by the very Omega they ignored. In the ruthless world of the lycanthrope elite, the ultimate power didn't roar. It struck in absolute, deadly silence. She was the queen.